Oh, I sat on the worn wooden chair in my parents' kitchen, the scent of roasted pork and warm garlic bread wafting through the air like a memory from my childhood. But tonight, the kitchen didn't feel like home. My parents, David and Linda Lee, sat across from me, eyes flicking between each other with an unspoken heaviness. My two younger brothers, Mason and Logan, lounged back in their seats with an air of smug anticipation. I could feel my pulse quicken, my breath shallow in my chest. David cleared his throat, his voice low but steady. Audrey, we wanted to talk to you about something important. Something we think you should hear from us now. I tried to steady my fork on my plate, but my hands trembled as he continued. We finalized our will last week, he said, glancing at Linda, as if for reassurance. She gave him a tiny, firm nod. Mason leaned forward, his lips twisting into a half smile. To keep it simple, Audrey, everything's going to me and Logan, he said casually, as if announcing the weather. My heart stopped. What? I choked out my voice barely above a whisper. Logan laughed softly, echoing Mason's words with a grin. Yeah, you're not in it at all, he said, leaning back with the careless confidence of someone who had just won a prize. I turned to my mother, searching for any sign of hesitation, any hint that this was some kind of sick joke. But she only tightened her grip on the napkin in her lap. Audrey, you're independent. You don't need our help, she said quietly, as if she truly believed it was fair. I sat frozen, the truth crashing over me like icy water. I had worked tirelessly for them, paying the mortgage, covering Logan's endless college tuition changes, sending Mason money for his car and social media stunts. I had always been there. And now I was nothing to them. Mason smirked. Let's not make a big deal out of it, he said. You're fine on your own right. I felt my hands curl into fists under the table, a tremor of hurt and fury coursing through me. My world had just shifted, and I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I stared at my brothers in that cramped kitchen, feeling my heart pounding so loudly, it almost drowned out their laughter. The air that smelled like roasted pork just minutes before now tasted bitter and stale in my mouth. Mason's smirk widened as he leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest like a king who had just claimed a kingdom. Logan's eyes danced with amusement, like this whole thing was some inside joke he couldn't wait to share later. My parents sat there silent and unmoved, their posture stiff with finality. My mind scrambled for something to say, something to make them see how cruel this was, but all I could manage was a hoarse, "After everything I've done for you, this is what you decide." Mason shrugged. No one asked you to help Audrey, he said in that infuriatingly calm voice, as if he were explaining a simple fact. You've always liked playing the martyr anyway. Logan chuckled, his head tilting to the side. Yeah, maybe you thought if you paid enough, they'd finally love you as much as they love us. His words cut deeper than any knife, and I turned my gaze back to my parents, desperate for a sign that they didn't agree with this. But my mother just sat there clutching her napkin like it was a lifeline, her lips pressed into a thin line. My father stared into his glass of water, as if the answers were at the bottom of that half-empty cup. A coldness seeped into my bones. I realized in that moment that there would be no apology, no explanation. I swallowed the lump in my throat and took a deep breath. If that's how you see it, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, then I have a decision to make too. Mason's eyebrows rose in amusement. Oh, and what decision is that, Audrey? I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the old linoleum floor. Don't expect anything from me anymore, I said, my voice calm, almost eerily so. Not money, not support, not one more ounce of effort. The silence that followed was almost deafening. My mother's eyes widened in disbelief, as if she hadn't expected me to actually stand up for myself. My father's lips parted, but no words came out. I turned and walked away from that kitchen table, the one I'd scrubbed clean every Sunday for family dinners, the one that had seen every birthday cake, every Thanksgiving turkey, every tearful confession, and every silent judgment. I walked past the chipped doorframe I'd once painted as a teenager, past the family photos that now felt like distant memories, and out into the cool night air that wrapped around me like a shield. No one called my name. No one stopped me. For the first time in my life, I didn't look back. Driving home, I didn't bother turning on the radio. The silence was more comforting than any music. My mind replayed every word Mason and Logan had thrown at me, every look my parents had given me or hadn't given me. The weight of all those years spent working overtime to cover their bills of missed vacations and canceled plans so I could send money home pressed down on my chest like an anchor. I realized that I had been so desperate to earn their love, I hadn't noticed I was drowning. Back in my apartment, I sank onto the couch, my hands trembling as I unlocked my phone. My banking app stared back at me like a mirror of my past choices, thousands of dollars transferred every month to keep them afloat. Wendler $800 to my parents for their mortgage. Wendler $200 to Mason and Logan, whenever they called, always with some new emergency. I hovered my finger over the automatic transfer section. My heart raced. My breath came in ragged gasps. For years I'd believed this was my responsibility, my role in the family. But tonight had shown me the truth. They didn't see me as family. I was just their safety net. I pressed cancel. A notification popped up, recurring payments successfully stopped, and a wave of emotion crashed over me. Anger, bitterness, but also a strange, overwhelming relief. I put my phone down and leaned back, feeling as if I'd just shrugged off a coat I'd been wearing for far too long. The apartment was quiet, the city outside still alive with traffic and laughter I could hear faintly through the windows. I closed my eyes and let the silence settle around me. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, every word from the kitchen echoing in my head. I remembered the times I'd driven Mason to job interviews when he was too hungover to take the bus. The times I'd paid for Logan's textbooks because he kept changing majors, chasing dreams he never bothered to finish. The times I'd worked late into the night just to send a little extra home. I told myself it was what family did, but now I saw that I had been alone in that belief. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. I didn't even have to look to know who it was. I finally answered when my mother's name flashed across the screen. "Audrey," she said, her voice tight with worry. "Did you really cancel this month's payment?" I took a breath and said the words I had never let myself say. "Yes, Mom," because I realized I don't have to do this anymore. She was silent for a moment, then said, "Family supports each other, Audrey. You know we rely on that money." I clenched my jaw. "Mom, family only matters to you when I'm paying for everything," I said quietly. "I've been helping for years, and now I'm done." "You're being selfish," she said, her voice rising with anger. "Why are you acting like this? Just because of the will?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Not about the will, Mom. It's about how you all treated me. It's about how you never saw me as anything but a wallet." She fell silent, and in that silence, I realized she had nothing left to say that would change my mind. I ended the call before she could twist my words around like she always did. I set my phone down on the table and closed my eyes. My chest felt heavy, but it wasn't the weight of guilt. It was the weight of finally standing up for myself. In the quiet that followed, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't the family ATM anymore. I wasn't the girl who dropped everything to fix other people's messes. I was just Audrey, no more, no less. And that was enough. I took a deep breath and opened my eyes, feeling a spark of something I hadn't felt in years: hope. The kitchen table was gone. The endless bank transfers were done. And for the first time in my life, I was finally free to decide what came next. The days after that final conversation with my mother felt eerily calm, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to shatter the stillness. I went about my life, showing up at work on time, attending meetings, even treating myself to quiet mornings, with fresh coffee in my favorite mug. But underneath the rhythm of my days, I could feel it, the simmering anger and resentment from my family growing like a dark storm cloud on the horizon. I had always known how much they depended on the money I sent home every month, but I hadn't realized how much they had come to expect it, like a right rather than a gift. When the automatic payments didn't show up in their accounts, they didn't hesitate to let me know. My phone rang constantly. Calls from Mason demanding to know what was going on, texts from Logan that grew increasingly aggressive, even my father's number flashing on the screen with a cold, stony insistence. But I ignored them all. I had made my decision. One night, after a long day at work, I returned to my apartment, my mind heavy with the weight of it all. I turned the key in the lock and pushed the door only to find it wouldn't budge. Confused, I pressed harder, but the door was sealed shut. I stepped back, my brow furrowing, as I noticed a thin, hardened layer of foam gluing the door to the frame. I touched it with my fingers, industrial foam, cold and rough. My heart started pounding, my pulse racing as the realization hit me. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. I backed away from the door, my breath quickening in my chest. For a split second, I wondered if I was overreacting, if maybe it was some freak accident or maintenance mishap. But deep down, I knew. I pulled out my phone and accessed the building's security cameras. My hands shook as I scrolled through the footage from earlier that evening, fast-forwarding minute by minute, until I saw him, Logan, his face partially hidden by a baseball cap and hoodie. But I would have recognized him anywhere the way he moved the tilt of his shoulders. He held the can of foam like a weapon, carefully filling every crack and crevice of my door, a smirk playing on his lips, even in the grainy footage. Rage burned through me. It wasn't enough for him to take my family's side. He wanted to punish me, to make sure I understood that even my own home wasn't safe from their retaliation. My first instinct was to confront him directly, to call and scream every word of betrayal I'd been holding back for years. But then I stopped. No more fighting their way. No more playing by their rules. Instead, I called the police. My voice was steady as I explained what had happened, even though my hands trembled with adrenaline. When the officers arrived, I showed them the footage, my voice calm, and even as I narrated what I had seen. One of them watched the video in silence, then looked up at me with a nod. "Do you want to press charges?" he asked. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with everything that had led to this moment. Every late-night phone call, every sacrifice I had made that had never been enough. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "I want him held accountable." The officer wrote up the report, and I signed it without hesitation. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just reacting to their choices, I was making my own. When I got back into my apartment, the air felt different, cleaner. The smell of fresh paint from the hallway renovations mixed with the crisp night air that drifted through the open windows. I sat on the couch and let the weight of the decision sink in. I knew this wasn't over. I knew my family would see this as the ultimate betrayal. But I also knew it was the only choice I could make. The next day, my phone rang again, and this time I picked up. My father's voice was cold-edged with something like disbelief. "Audrey," he said, his tone as sharp as broken glass, "Logan was just called in by the police. How could you do this to your own family?" I closed my eyes, taking in the words that I had heard so many times, in so many ways. "Logan vandalized my property. Dad," I said, my voice calm. "If he didn't want consequences, he shouldn't have done it." There was a pause, a heavy silence, and then his voice turned dark. "How much do you want?" he asked, as if this was just another negotiation. I didn't hesitate. $3,000, I said, to cover the damage and the inconvenience. His disbelief was almost palpable. "You're extorting your own brother," he hissed. I let out a humorless laugh, the sound cold and hollow in the quiet of my apartment. "It's not extortion, Dad. It's called responsibility." The money arrived the next morning. $3,000 transferred into my account, accompanied by a single line in the memo, "I never want to see you again." I read the message, feeling nothing. No guilt, no sorrow. Just a quiet, resolute acceptance. They were making their choice, and I was making mine. But it didn't stop there. My phone buzzed with new messages, some from Mason calling me ungrateful, a traitor to the family. Some from Logan cursing me for daring to stand up to him. I opened social media and saw the post my mother had written, a long, manipulative story, painting me as a heartless daughter who abandoned her aging parents and struggling brothers. Friends of the family, distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, flooded the comments with words of pity for my parents and disgust for me. I felt my stomach twist, not with shame, but with anger. They were rewriting the story, turning me into the villain, so they didn't have to face the truth. For a moment, I wanted to scream, to call everyone I knew and tell them what really happened. But instead, I took a breath and found a different kind of strength. I opened my own app, drafted a post, and told my side of the story. I wrote about the years of financial support, the thousands of dollars that had kept my parents in their house, that had paid for Mason's failed startups, and Logan's endless dreams. I described the night Logan sealed my door shut, and how I had finally realized that love shouldn't come with a price tag. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't hold back. I told the truth. When I hit post, I felt a tremor of fear, but also a surge of freedom. The comments started pouring in, some from relatives, who said they had no idea, some from friends who shared words of support I hadn't even known I needed. My family didn't reply, but that silence said more than any argument ever could. That night, as I sat on my balcony, the city lights stretching out before me, I realized that this was more than just a fight with my family. It was a battle for my own life, my own peace. And for the first time, I knew I had won. The silence that followed my post was louder than any accusation my family had ever hurled at me. It was a silence filled with the echo of their disbelief and the weight of a truth they had spent years trying to bury. But for once, I didn't feel the need to fill that silence with explanations or apologies. I had finally said what needed to be said. My phone buzzed with messages from distant relatives, old friends, and even coworkers who had seen my post. Some of them offered quiet support, short texts that said, "I believe you," or "I'm so proud of you." Others sent long paragraphs of disbelief that my family could have treated me this way for so long. A few even admitted that they had always sensed something was off, but had never wanted to get involved. But the messages that meant the most to me were the ones from people I barely knew. People who said they had lived the same story, who had carried the weight of an ungrateful family on their shoulders for far too long. Their words were like balm to the raw ache in my chest. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone in this. There were so many of us people who had been taught to equate love with sacrifice until it drained us dry. 3 days after I posted the truth, my mother called. Her voice was tight, like she was holding back tears, or maybe fury. "Audrey," she said, her tone trembling, "what the hell did you do? Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" I leaned back in my chair, my hand resting on the edge of the kitchen table I had bought with my own money, in my own apartment. "I told the truth, Mom," I said calmly. "You've been twisting it for years. It was time people knew." She drew in a sharp breath. "You're humiliating us," she snapped. "Your father won't even leave the house. Mason and Logan are furious. You're tearing this family apart." Her words might have cut deep once, but now they sounded hollow. "No, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "You're the ones who tore it apart the day you decided my worth ended with my bank account." I just finally stopped pretending. For a moment, she was silent, and in that silence, I could almost hear her calculating, trying to find the right words to guilt me back into line. But I had heard it all before. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold and final. "If you do this," she said, "don't expect to come back. We're done with you." My chest tightened, but instead of the old familiar dread, I felt relief. "That's fine," I whispered. "You already let me go a long time ago." I hung up before she could say anything else. That was the last time I heard her voice. In the weeks that followed, my family went completely silent. No more phone calls, no more messages. It was as if I had ceased to exist to them, and for once, I didn't feel guilty about it. The freedom was almost startling. My apartment, once a place I returned to, only to collapse from exhaustion, now felt like a sanctuary. I started sleeping better at night. The weight that had sat heavy on my chest for years finally lifted. I cooked meals just for me, real meals, not microwave dinners eaten between sending them money. I played music as loud as I wanted, filling the space with songs that made me feel alive, instead of muted. But even in this new peace, there was a hollow space inside me. A part of me still ached with the knowledge that I had once believed love was something you earned by giving until you had nothing left. That part of me needed to understand, needed to see the full picture. So I did something I had never dared before. I pulled out every bank statement, every transfer record, every old email and text I had saved. I laid them all out on my kitchen table, each one a testament to the years I had spent holding up a family that never saw me. I saw the thousands of dollars I had sent home, money that could have paid for my own dreams, my own life. I saw the way they had always asked for more, never a thank you, never a pause to ask if I was okay. And I saw how I had let it happen because I thought it was my role to fix everything. Looking at those papers, I felt an anger that was hot and righteous and long overdue. But underneath that anger, there was also a kind of quiet pride. Because those numbers weren't just debts. They were proof of my strength, of how much I had carried, even when no one cared to notice. And so, I decided it was time to share that truth, not just in a post online, but in every corner of my life where I had once been silent. I started talking openly to the people I trusted, friends, coworkers, even a few extended family members who reached out. I told them how my family had cut me off when I stopped paying, how they had tried to rewrite the story to make me the villain, how I had finally stopped letting them decide what my life was worth. The more I shared, the more I realized that telling my story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice. My story was no longer something I carried alone in the dark. It was a bright light I could hold up to the world, a way to remind myself that I had nothing to be ashamed of. And with every word I spoke, I felt the old chains of guilt and duty break away one by one. Still, the backlash came. My mother's social media post had already painted me as a monster, and there were people who believed it, people who didn't know me or didn't care to hear the other side. They left angry comments, called me cold and ungrateful. I read them all, feeling the sting of each one like a fresh cut. But then I would look around at my apartment, at the quiet peace I had built, and remember that none of those strangers knew what it had cost me to finally choose myself. One night, I got a message from a childhood friend I hadn't spoken to in years. "I saw your post," she wrote. "I always wondered why you looked so tired all the time. I'm so sorry, Audrey. You deserved better." Her words hit me harder than any of the hate, because they reminded me that even when the world seemed ready to believe the worst about me, there were people who saw the truth. That was enough. As the days turned into weeks, I stopped checking the comments. I stopped worrying about what my family might say next. Instead, I started focusing on the future, on the quiet mornings that were just mine, on the dreams I had pushed aside for so long. I signed up for a pottery class I'd always wanted to take. I spent hours in the studio, my hands covered in clay, the weight of the past falling away with every turn of the wheel. In that small act of creation, I found something I hadn't known. I was missing the joy of building something just for me. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about choosing to live, not just survive. And for the first time, I let myself believe I was allowed to do that. The final blow my family had tried to deliver, silencing me with lies, had failed. Instead, it had given me the courage to speak louder, to live more fully, to love myself without apology. And in that choice, I found the freedom they had tried to take from me all those years. In the quiet that followed my decision to tell the truth, my life settled into a rhythm I had never known before, one without the constant tug of guilt, without the sharp sting of family manipulation. For the first time in my adult life, I was living for myself. And though the silence from my family was deafening at first, it soon became a gentle hush, a background note to the symphony of my newfound freedom. My days began with slow mornings, cups of hot coffee on my balcony, as the city woke up beneath a sky that felt bigger than it ever had. There were no desperate phone calls interrupting my peace, no endless messages demanding money or explanations. My apartment, once just a place to sleep in between obligations, felt like a sanctuary. The scent of fresh flowers I picked up from the corner market filled the small living room, mingling with the warm sunlight that streamed through the windows. In those quiet spaces, I learned to breathe again. My work flourished in ways I hadn't even realized were possible. Free from the weight of endless financial responsibilities, I threw myself into a major project at the firm, a new initiative that had the potential to reshape our department. My energy was electric, my mind focused. Late nights that used to be spent calculating how to cover the next month's bills for my family became evenings of brainstorming with my team, driven not by obligation, but by excitement. My boss noticed too. She called me into her office one Friday afternoon, her eyes warm and appraising. Audrey, she said, a small smile on her lips. I've been watching how you've handled this project. You're a natural leader. I want you to take point on the next phase. The pride that bloomed in my chest felt sharper and sweeter than any paycheck I had ever sent home. I accepted the challenge with a nod, and as I walked back to my desk, I realized that for the first time, my efforts were truly my own. The promotion came a month later. I moved into a new office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city's skyline, tall buildings, rivers of traffic, and a sky that seemed to stretch on forever. I stood there for a long moment, my hand resting against the cool glass, feeling the pulse of the city thrumming beneath my fingertips. In that view, I saw possibility, endless and unclaimed. And I knew deep down that this was just the beginning. But even as my career soared, there was a part of me that wanted to reclaim something more personal, something I had put on hold for years. I thought about all the trips I had canceled, all the dreams I had set aside in the name of family loyalty. And so, one evening, as the city lights glittered like 1,000 tiny promises, I booked a flight to Spain. The decision felt both impulsive and inevitable, like a door I had always known I would walk through one day. When the plane landed in Barcelona, the city greeted me with warm breezes and a sense of adventure I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. I wandered through the narrow streets of the Gothic Quarter, my senses alive to every detail: the tang of sea air, the rich scent of freshly baked bread, the sound of Spanish guitar drifting from an open window. I let the city wash over me, each moment a small reclamation of the life I had put on hold. On my third night there, I found myself in a small cafe, tucked away from the tourist crowds. The place was dimly lit, with mismatched chairs and a soft hum of conversation. I ordered a glass of Rioja and settled into a corner table, letting the warmth of the wine soothe the last of my nerves. That was when I met Daniel. He was a few years older than me, with an easy smile and a quiet confidence that felt immediately comforting. We started talking about everything Barcelona art, our favorite places in the world. With him, there were no expectations, no past debts to repay. Just two people sharing a moment that was theirs alone. The next few days were a blur of color and laughter. Daniel showed me hidden courtyards and local markets, taught me how to pronounce Catalan words I'd only ever read in guidebooks. We watched the sunset from the steps of Montjuic, the city spread out before us like a living painting. One night, as we sat on a rooftop terrace under strings of golden lights, he turned to me and said, "You seem so free here, Audrey, like you're finally breathing." And in that moment, I realized he was right. I had been holding my breath for so long, waiting for permission to live. And here in this city that had seen centuries of change, I was finally giving that permission to myself. When I returned home, I brought that sense of freedom with me. My apartment felt brighter somehow, full of possibility instead of obligation. I started filling my weekends with things that fed my soul. I took long walks along the river, let myself get lost in the pages of novels I'd always meant to read. I signed up for a painting class, my fingers stained with color, that felt like hope itself. And in every small choice, I felt a piece of myself returning stronger and more whole than before. My family stayed silent through it all. No calls, no texts. But instead of feeling like a wound, that silence became a space for me to grow. I learned to fill it with laughter that was mine alone, with the gentle quiet of mornings spent with coffee and music, with the steady beat of a heart that no longer belonged to someone else's expectations. And as the months slipped by, I realized that their absence was not a loss, it was a gift, a chance to write my own story. One evening, as I watched the sun sink behind the skyline, I thought about the girl I had been, the girl who believed that love was something you earned by emptying your pockets and silencing your voice. I thought about how she would have been terrified by the idea of standing alone, of choosing herself over the family that had never really seen her. And then, I thought about the woman I was becoming. A woman who had learned that freedom wasn't something given, it was something you claimed one brave choice at a time. In that moment, I felt a quiet peace settle over me, soft and certain. My journey wasn't over. There would still be days when I missed the idea of family, still nights, when the memories of what I had given up would ache like old scars. But for the first time, I knew I could face those moments with my head held high. Because I had chosen to stand in the light of my own life. And that light, I realized, was enough. The days turned into weeks, and the quiet rhythm of my life settled like a soft, warm blanket around me. In the golden morning light that spilled through my apartment windows, I found a kind of peace I had never known before, a stillness that was no longer tinged with the fear of what someone might ask of me next. I had spent so many years being defined by what I gave, by how much I could bend to meet everyone else's needs, that it took me a long time to understand that my worth had never been measured by my wallet or my willingness to be their safety net. It was something that had always been mine. On crisp autumn mornings, I would sit on my balcony, a steaming mug of coffee, warming my hands, and watch the world wake up around me. The air was filled with the scent of wet leaves and the promise of a new day. In those moments, I would think about everything I had left behind, the endless bank transfers, the late-night calls, filled with accusations, the weight of their disappointment pressing down on me like a lead blanket. And I realized that what I had gained was so much more than freedom from their demands. I had gained the freedom to define love on my own terms. I began to see that love wasn't supposed to be a transaction. It wasn't supposed to be something you earned by giving and giving until you had nothing left. True love, the kind that fills you up instead of emptying you out, is quiet and steady like the early morning light. It doesn't demand proof or payment. It doesn't keep score. It simply is. I had spent years believing that if I just gave enough, if I just proved myself enough, my family would see me, would finally love me in the way I had always longed for. But the truth was, they never saw me at all. And in that realization, there was a kind of grief, a mourning for the love I had chased for so long. But there was also relief, because I no longer needed to keep chasing. I started to fill the spaces in my life that had once been crowded with obligations. On Saturday mornings, I joined a yoga class at a small studio around the corner. My body, so used to the tension of holding everything together, slowly learned to let go. In the quiet flow of breath and movement, I felt something unfurl inside me, something soft and strong. I met new friends there, people who knew nothing about my past, who didn't care about what I could provide or what I had given up. With them, I could laugh, freely share stories about travels and favorite books and silly childhood dreams without feeling like every word had to prove my worth. Sometimes I would find myself thinking about Spain, about the way the sun had felt on my skin as I wandered through the winding streets of Barcelona, about the taste of fresh bread and warm olive oil, about Daniel's gentle smile, and the way his eyes lit up when he talked about architecture and beauty. He had shown me what it felt like to be seen without expectation, to be valued, simply because I existed. Even though our paths had diverged after that trip, his kindness lingered with me like the memory of a warm summer night. At work, I found a new sense of purpose. The project I had poured my heart into was thriving, and with every success, I felt my confidence grow. My boss pulled me aside one afternoon, her eyes crinkling with pride. "Audrey, she said you have a gift. Don't ever let anyone make you doubt that." I smiled, and for the first time, I believed her. I believed in myself, not because someone else had told me I was enough, but because I had learned to see it in the quiet strength of my own choices. Yet even as my life flourished in new and unexpected ways, there were moments when the past would whisper at the edges of my mind. A familiar pang of guilt would flicker when I thought about my parents' house, about the brothers who had once been the center of every decision I made. I wondered if they still saw me as the villain in their story, the traitor who walked away. But then, I would remember the night I canceled the payments, the night I stood up in that kitchen and said no more, and I knew I couldn't go back. I didn't want to, because the greatest lesson I had learned was this: you can love someone with every part of your heart, but if they refuse to see you as more than what you give them, that love will only bleed you dry. Real family, real love, it doesn't hold you hostage. It doesn't see your worth in dollar signs or how quickly you pick up the pieces when everything falls apart. It sees you for who you are and loves you anyway. On the rare nights when doubt crept in, I would light a single candle on my kitchen table, the flickering flame a reminder of the light I carried within myself. I would close my eyes and breathe deeply, feeling the soft thud of my heart in my chest, steady, resilient, alive. And I would whisper to the darkness, I am enough. I thought back to the girl I had been when this all began, the girl who had believed that family meant sacrificing everything, even her own dreams for the comfort of others. I thought about how far I had come from her, how much strength it had taken to let go of the life I thought I had to live. And I felt a quiet pride rise in my chest, because I had learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's an act of love, the truest kind there is. As winter melted into spring, I stood on my balcony one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon in a blaze of soft gold and dusky pink. The city hummed beneath me, full of lives, unfolding in 1,000 different directions. I felt the warmth of the fading light on my skin and thought about all the roads still waiting for me, all the places I had yet to go. And in that moment, I knew that my story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. I turned back into my apartment, the scent of fresh flowers filling the air, and let a small smile curl across my lips. The lesson I had learned, the one that had cost me so much and given me even more, was etched in every choice I made from that day forward. I would never again trade my peace for someone else's comfort. I would never again let anyone make me believe that love was something I had to buy or beg for. I would live my life for me, and that I realized was the truest form of love I could ever know. As the soft spring breeze drifted in through my open window, I found myself reflecting on all the ways my life had changed. Each morning, the sunlit streets below reminded me of how much bigger the world was than the narrow walls of family expectations I had once confined myself within. I had learned to breathe in that wide open space, to let each sunrise be a promise that my future was no longer bound to anyone else's demands. But as I stood there one evening, coffee cup in hand, and the quiet city stretching out before me, a message from a distant cousin appeared on my screen, its words simple but heavy. "They're struggling, Audrey. Will you come back?" The words made my chest tighten. For a fleeting moment, the old weight of guilt and duty threatened to rise up and pull me back. But then, I remembered the lesson I had fought so hard to learn. Real love is not measured by how much you sacrifice. It's in the quiet certainty of knowing your own worth. I had carried their burdens for so long that I had forgotten how to stand tall on my own. But not anymore. I looked out over the city, the last rays of sun painting the rooftops in soft gold, and I let the message linger there in my mind. I didn't need to answer right away. I didn't owe anyone that. Instead, I let the silence speak for me, a quiet refusal to let someone else's struggles become the measure of my life again. Turning back to my apartment, I felt the small, steady beat of my heart guiding me forward. This was my life now, built on choices that were mine alone, surrounded by people who saw me as I was not as a reflection of their needs. I didn't know what the future would bring, or what new paths I might find. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to find out. Because the story of Audrey Lee was no longer about family debts or broken promises. It was about the freedom to write my own ending one sunrise at a time. What would you choose if you were Audrey? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let this story remind us all that freedom begins the moment you decide to claim it.